All right, welcome back. For those of you just joining us, I'm Julie Lenzer, Chief Innovation Officer at the University of Maryland and the founding director of the Quantum Startup Foundry, who is bringing you this great Quantum Investment Summit. And so it is my pleasure to introduce our final streaming program for the day, a fireside chat with newly appointed CEO of ColdQuanta, Scott Faris. And here to lead the conversation is Ben Solomon. So Ben is the founder and managing partner of FedTech, a preeminent venture accelerator focusing on deep technology. Ben founded FedTech in 2014 and has guided the firm to become an international company focused on catalyzing interaction between the venture world and the R&D community. A few of the members that we have here in this room, I would say. FedTech has worked with hundreds of deep tech ventures that have raised over $130 million in private and grant funding. The firm partners with leading R&D labs inside government, academia, and industry. An expert in models of technology commercialization, Ben has taught MBAs here at his alma mater, the University of Maryland, in the Smith School of Business. Yay, Terps! He previously held positions at NBC Sports and Bloomberg News. He holds a BA in History from Princeton University and an MBA from right here at the University of Maryland. Please join me in welcoming Ben and Scott.
Great, thank you, Julie. And wonderful program. So happy to be here. This is my first in-person conference since all this began, and it's awfully fun to be with all of you. So we are the last session before happy hour begins, so we'll try to keep it a little bit light. It's a pleasure here to be here with Scott Faris. So Scott is as was mentioned, CEO of ColdQuanta. Been on the job just for a few weeks, but exciting vision for the company. And Scott and I were catching up a little bit earlier, and he has a remarkable 3 decades of technology commercialization and company growing experience. When there's the next big thing coming, I think Scott has always been able to find it. So whether that's been optics or batteries or autonomous driving, Scott has been there to help grow companies from a business standpoint. Most recently, before coming to ColdQuanta, he was CEO of Luminar Technologies, which he grew from a small company to being an $8 billion publicly traded company, so pretty neat. And we're just going to have a discussion, I think, around business models and building companies. We'll talk for just a handful of minutes and really encourage all of you to ask questions as well. So Scott, please just share a little bit of your story, your background, and where you think you're going.
Sure, absolutely. Again, this is my first in-person conference, so I'm excited to see people again. This is very exciting. So my career, I started in 1989, so kind of date myself a little bit. Penn State grad, so at least still in the Big Ten. But I started off in the venture side doing spin-outs from universities. So I was working with a venture fund. We'd go in and find some cool technologies and link that to a market and build a business around it. And then eventually kind of moved over to the operating side, decided my ambition at the time was to go back into venture capital, but I realized all the great VCs I was working with also had significant operating experience. So I had to go get my operating stripes, and so I went to a company that we had funded as the chief operating officer and decided I liked the operating side, so I've kind of been on that side ever since. So I've been in, we commercialized a business in spectroscopy. We grew that into a $100 million business, did planar light wave circuits, so batteries, most recently in the autonomous vehicle space. That was a great success. That was a unique story, and as a hyper-growth company, a uniquely California thing where the company is, adding. I think we've gone from 7 employees 6 years ago to a little over 800 employees today. So managing enterprise, a global enterprise of that scale, is its own unique beast, and it's had to reinvent itself many times over the years, and will probably continue to reinvent itself. So.
We'll talk a little bit about just ColdQuanta and for someone that's come with your background, what drew you to the opportunity and why you had to take the job.
Sure. So I just joined ColdQuanta. I'm so new. I still am discovering buildings and rooms with programs I didn't know existed. They weren't allowed to show it to me. I was there for the interviews, so I stumbled into some stuff last week. But no, I think I was very happy with my tenure at Luminar. It's been a great story, but for me, I wanted to go kind of figure out what's next. And there was only, quite frankly, one thing more exciting than autonomous vehicles and autonomous driving, and that was quantum. And I've been kind of tracking quantum for a while, and so when the opportunity came along, it was definitely something I was excited about. And as I started digging into what ColdQuanta is doing, which is in the neutral atom space, I realized it really, in many ways, was the same picks and shovels that we were using in the LiDAR space. Lasers, scanners, receivers, it's the same fundamental core technologies. We're building a different product, but a lot of the enabling platform was exactly the same vendors in some instances. And so it was very familiar to me, but the scale of it was exciting, and it was just too great of an opportunity not to take advantage of. And so again, I made the decision to jump over and build a quantum business.
When you described yourself to me as usually the first business hire that comes in to a bunch of scientific talent and is sort of the scale guy, the person that helps kind of grow. Talk to me about what that means to you, what you've learned over the years just in that process.
Yeah, so not by design, but really by just kind of natural, just where I was gravitated to. I've always been the first business guy in a business, and it's usually been with founders, whether they're faculty at universities or researchers at national labs or even research teams out of defense contractors. I've been the first real business person, and I'm usually been dropped in by the investors to figure out how to take a really great idea and build a business around it. And there's a lot of challenges with that. And, typically these businesses are very research focused. They don't necessarily have the commercial culture, don't have the product culture. And so a lot of it is building that culture in the business, but by frankly also being respectful to the founders. That's probably the most delicate part of this, is that the founders ultimately are entrusting me to take what has been their life's work and turn it into something meaningful and profitable. And that's a special opportunity and a responsibility that I don't take lightly. And it's some instances I've done exceptionally well, in some instances I've kind of fumbled the ball and learned and recovered, but there's a relationship that really is necessary to build with the founders and the investors, and in many cases to also be the bridge between the founders and investors, and kind of being a translator in some instances. The founders don't often really understand what the investors are trying to accomplish, and vice versa. So that's kind of a special relationship that takes a long time to build.
Yeah, I think, on that note, we have a handful of just awesome, fantastic companies here that have technical founders, and I'm curious if you were to provide just some guidance to the technical founders on when it makes sense to bring in outside, advice, whether it's from advisors or potentially, a first CEO hire. What's that tipping point? Is it dollars? Is it complexity?
Well, one thing I would say is you should always be seeking perspective. I think you always want to have folks with relevant outside expertise. One of the most common mistakes, and I'm sure folks in this room have seen it, and I'm sure you've seen it, is just getting basic, professional services advice. So if you want advice on legal, find someone who actually understands the venture side of legal, not your general attorney that maybe have handled your real estate transactions or heaven forbid a divorce. So you want experts that are really relevant to what you need, but ultimately it comes a point in any business, if it's growing and being successful, where what I tell founders is there's a separation of roles, and that's a kind of an important moment in the evolution of a business, where you as a founder really have to take a step back and separate your role as a founder and a shareholder from your role as a manager. A lot of times I've worked with founders who have aspirations of being, Steve Jobs, or someone I've started the business, I grew the business, I took it public, I ran it for 15 years after taking it public, and I think I was telling you earlier, I had some graduate students run the statistics on that, and I think the short answer was you're more likely to be Tom Brady than you were to have that outcome. So that's a rare outcome to have that, but a lot of founders have that expectation. And so the conversation I often have is, when you have that moment as a shareholder versus a manager, you have to ask yourself, as a shareholder, am I the best person for this particular role in the company? And you have to be intellectually honest with yourself. And the answer is no. That's the moment where you really need to start bringing outside perspective and expertise in the business, because you want the business to be successful. You want your value in the business to be successful. And you've got to bring people in that can take those roles and functions and execute it.
It's been one of the, I mentioned earlier, when we were kind of prepping for this, it's one of the things that as an accelerator, right, we get to see, dozens of companies every year, and it's the team dynamics of, how the initial founding team grows and brings in the right perspective to help, at the next phase is a continual challenge. I'm curious if you were to give advice to any of the technical founders here of how do you find your your business Yoda, so to speak. Like what how do you find, him or her? How do you evaluate whether they're a good, fit to be helpful?
I mean, you certainly want someone who has experience and a track record, but I also think you really need to look for somebody that you can work with in a trusted relationship. As I said a few minutes ago, this is a trusted relationship, and I think if that trust can be built, that handoff is a lot easier to do. And it's going to overcome the inevitable rough patches. There's going to be things that go wrong along the way, and there's going to be things that you don't necessarily see eye to eye on, and you've got to be able to work through those instances. And it's just more than even bringing in one executive. You have to do this across the entire executive team, and that's really gets real challenging, is that you now have 4 or 5 different perspectives that you as a founder have to be able to kind of navigate through. And again, there may not be consensus among the whole group, and so kind of building that relationship and finding the right personality. Culture fit, I'm sure you've all heard this before, but culture fit is everything. At Luminar, we've built and rebuilt executive teams over the last 6 years. A lot of it is because the business has been growing so rapidly, we've had to continually up-level the leadership in the organization. But finding the right talent, I would say the folks that ultimately weren't successful in that system that we built were folks that didn't have the good cultural fit. They couldn't pivot when we needed to pivot, and they didn't have, in some cases, the right sense of humor. Sense of humor is really important in a growing business because there's a lot of stress, and you need to have a good sense of humor to get through that.
Yeah. So shifting over a little bit to funding and kind of what you've experienced kind of in your career of building companies. So we see a lot of entrepreneurs that are very concerned to work directly with government, as a partner, a funding partner, because they don't want to become a government contractor. They don't want to have their product development constrained at all. ColdQuanta and then a lot of your previous companies have had a healthy dose of government, support in parallel with private funding. I'm curious, like, how you've thought about that balance, right? Of how do you leverage the best of government as an investor while also being able to move kind of at a commercial product development speed?
Yeah, and that's actually something that we're really kind of sorting through in ColdQuanta right now. I mean, ColdQuanta has been around for 12, 13 years. We've attracted well over $50 million of government funding to do a lot of the foundational neutral atom work that we've done. And it's a big part of our business. We're doing about $9 to $10 million a year baseline funding with government funding for various programs. And one of the questions that we have is this something that we continue to do? It's an engine for us in terms of core R&D. It's an engine for the industry. We enable a lot of our competitors and collaborators. We have we call picks and shovels part to our business. We sell cells. We sell a lot of basic components a lot of the other quantum companies need for their product. And again, so we have a very special position in the industry that was enabled by our government collaborators over the years, and that's certainly something we want to continue to support. So I think for us, we're finding a balance, being able to continue to do that. My view is if it pays for itself, it's basically an R&D group that doesn't cost us any money, but we have to have a commercial focus. And I know if I go back to the first company that I was involved with, it started off largely an SBIR company. I think they had won about 15 SBIR awards over the years. And we had looked around at a lot of companies that tried to go commercial after living off SBIR money, and virtually all of them failed. And so we made a pretty dramatic decision that we would just stop going after SBIRs. And we would completely live and die off of commercial sales. We wanted to be a commercial company, and we recognized culturally that if we always could fall back, well, we didn't make this happen, or we didn't make this happen. So, but we have the SBIR contracts coming in, so we'll figure out how to survive. We knew we couldn't build a commercial business out of this, so we went cold turkey. We stopped going after SBIRs. It was dicey for about a year, but we built a very substantial commercial business out of that. I truly believe had we not made that decision to go cold turkey, it would have continued to be an SBIR mill, and none of that technology would have made its way into the marketplace. Fast forward, that company, I think every Mars rover, the last 3 Mars rovers had instruments from that company on it. So it's played a role in continued research, and I think almost every science lab I've ever been in has their instruments in it. So.
Well, it seems like we got to meet ColdQuanta through the FedTech Search program, which is an Army funding program, and we got to work with some of your team before you got there. And then there's a lot of, I think, kind of good funding opportunities out there that are not going to constrain you or but don't allow you to maybe get as fat and happy.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of it is, and this is, I think we've heard a lot of this today, is a lot more collaboration as well. I think in the quantum space, obviously collaboration is the key to kind of uplifting the whole industry, but we're certainly going after more collaborative research projects where we have partners that are bringing other skill sets to the table. That'll allow us to continue to grow and support that business, but without having to go out and develop new skill sets. We can leverage others, and if those are skill sets we want to bring in eventually, we can find a way to do that. But again, I think I've charged the team to really go out and find those collaborative opportunities. Even with the parts business now, we're kind of changing that business model around to, it's not simply about selling glass cells to folks. It's, if someone's interested in a glass cell, we want to understand, okay, how do we build on that relationship? How do we leverage what you want to learn with what we're doing? We'll enable you with some of our technology, but we want to have a more meaningful partnership going forward.
Well, and actually, we're going to open it up just so please get your questions ready. While we're doing that, though, let's talk to me a little bit, Scott, about deep tech investors. They're not plentiful necessarily. Those private investors that want to really work with the type of companies that you've built. How did you find them? How did you build relationships? How did you grow those relationships over time?
That honestly, that's probably the toughest part of this. When we were doing the battery project, which was a spin out from 3 of the national labs, we did an analysis of all of the deep tech investors in the Valley, and funding a battery company is no small task. It's a lot of money, and we were talking about this at lunch today. And we started looking at, of all the funds that were actively investing, all the partners that understood deep tech, all the partners that were still active in the business, and all the partners that had enough gravitas to get a deal through. I think we came down to there were 7 people left in Silicon Valley that kind of met all those requirements. And so just to kind of quantify the scale of the problem, that's the scale of the problem is, and it's manifested itself. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. One of the things that concerns me about the quantum space is if I take a look back and I look at new industries or industry-defining opportunities, the United States doesn't necessarily have a great track record of capitalizing on what we do. If our current situation, if we go back to 2000 to 2003, Huawei was essentially built on the back of about 20 venture-backed companies that the venture industry basically fell out of favor with and were purchased. That really is the foundation of what our kind of Huawei was built around. So we lost 5G leadership over a decision in the venture industry from the early 2000s. Same thing happened in the battery industry in 2010, 2011, 2012. A lot of the really great battery chemistries that are being commercialized in China were developed in the United States in national research labs. Again, these were spun out as U.S. companies, deep tech companies that required significant investment. Investors lost patience, the investment dried up, and the technology was acquired and moved offshore. And so, one of the things that deeply concerns me about where we are right now is that we can't afford to do the same thing in quantum. That we have to have investors that understand that this is a long view, be able to invest over the long view. As a CEO, I have to figure out how to create revenue in the near term to show that we're making progress and the investment is worth it. But this isn't the software business. And the software players in this business aren't really going to figure out how to make money until we figure out the hardware side of the business. So that's the challenge.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Yeah. Well, so just questions from the audience here.
Hi, I'm Amanda Stein. I work with the Quantum Technology Center and also a little bit with FedTech too. So nice to have you, Ben, and nice to meet you. So specifically, I know that ColdQuanta has essentially a range of products, we'll call it for lack of a better term, which is kind of unique in the quantum startup space.
Yeah.
I mean, you've worked with companies such as IonQ related to their ion traps, but now you're building your own quantum computer. How does a quantum company like yours have a focus, but then also have multiple product lines, which is kind of unique in the space, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is, we are both a competitor and arms merchant for the industry at the same time, and it is a unique challenge. And again, that was one of the things that really excited me about the company. Again, I think you've heard the theme today that we need to survive together. This is something We all have to kind of lift the industry up. We're in a unique position to be able to do that. And my view was that, again, that piece of the business that we're in, where we're supplying pieces and parts and technologies to other competitors in the business or other collaborators in the business, is a great opportunity to kind of build that network connectivity. And that's something that we're intent on doing. It's a part of our business that basically pays for itself. The research business is a part of the business that pays for itself. So, from an investment perspective, what that allows us to do is, if we want to raise outside dollars, we can focus those dollars on opportunities that are going to create high return, high value for the investors. And that's really in the compute space. So we made a decision a couple years ago to build a computer using the neutral atom approach. That is the focus of the business. We actually have 2 processing platforms that we'll be bringing to market. But that is the focus right now of the business, is making that part successful. Again, the picks and shovel business and the research business pays for itself, and it continues to fund the R&D core of the business.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Scott. Other questions from the audience at all?
Hi, Scott. This is Alex Khan. And as you know, I've already used the Albert system at Harrisburg University. My question is, what is your plan to really make Bose-Einstein condensate, or the kind of quantum computers you're building, like with Lattice, more known in the educational areas, like high school students or graduate university students? Because unless they see this as an exciting thing, you're not going to get a lot of people adopting it.
Yeah, no, so that's a great question. And actually, this ties into kind of a broader strategy, a multi-threaded issue and opportunity. Again, there's been a lot of conversation today about the lack of depth in the talent pool. Right? We're building a new industry. There's not a lot of people that are naturally there. This is one of the things that I found very interesting. This is the autonomous vehicle and LiDAR space was in the same situation, 5 or 6 years ago, relative to perception engineers. There was a handful of perception engineers in the world that were worthwhile, and everyone was competing for them. And so we had to figure out how we grew the pool. So to your point, is one of the things that when we had Albert running, we were really amazed about the number of users that were students that effectively were playing on it. It was something we were doing in partnership with CU. That's something we will continue to do. We'll make time available on that so that we can continue to attract students to use and explore. One, it helps us build the talent pool for the industry, which is vitally important. 2, they're doing it on our platform, so hopefully they get excited about our platform. But yeah, I think that the thing that's most intriguing about this, and this is a lesson I learned in a previous business, the people playing on it in some cases don't necessarily have preconceived notions about how to do things. They're on there playing with it. They're going to discover, and they're going to probably discover ways to do things differently that existing industry wouldn't think of. And this is a lesson I learned early on. I was working with a medical device company, and we knew we needed to move quickly. And so we're going to 3D print everything. And so we hired traditional mechanical engineers that were used to making tooling for injection molding machines, and they were really struggling with it. And so I hired an ME from University of Central Florida as an intern. And long story short, within 6 months, he basically had taken over the whole program. We eliminated the MEs that we had brought on board. Some of these guys had 20, 30 years of experience. The student just intrinsically understood how to program and play with a 3D printer. And he was coming up with designs that our existing team could never come up with. And my takeaway from that was, if you're really exploiting a disruptive technology, don't necessarily look to leadership from the incumbents in the old way of doing things. It was really putting it in the hands of someone that was kind of a clean palette. They didn't know what to expect. They didn't know what to do. They just had the opportunity to play with it and learn with it. And through that discovery process, in this particular instance, he came up with some very disruptive and innovative designs for that medical device. So that's a theme I want to carry through here. We want to make these tools available for students to play with for discovery.
Great question.
Andre Koenig, I'm an investor in Quantum and chairman of One Quantum. Our logo is behind the salad as one of the QSF partners. This morning we talked about use cases and how there's a chicken and egg problem.
Yep.
We don't know yet what we don't know, and this trillion-dollar opportunity, we need to make progress to find it. You talked a little bit about your near term and roadmap. Do you have a life and earth-changing vision as well?
Yeah, look, I think, again, this is kind of more the same theme, is that, again, I think the analogy that works here is, again, what we've seen in the autonomous driving business, right? It was a chicken and egg issue for autonomous driving. And the lesson learned from that is ultimately the ability to increase the proficiency of the technology was directly related to just road time. The more miles that you had out learning, right? In this case, in the autonomous industry, it was seeing things, and it's translated into perception algorithms. And there were initial thoughts that the perception algorithms had to be extremely sophisticated. But what happened is that the machines need to be very sophisticated. What happened over time is the algorithms got simpler, the machines got a little more powerful, and there was an intersection. And this is, to some degree, what Tesla's been trying to leverage by getting as many cars on the road collecting data, what Waymo's been doing. And I really see the same thing happening here. This is about getting more people on machines, learning, more inexperienced users from different industries that don't necessarily have the experience playing with it, coupling those with people that know how to do this, and through that joint discovery process, again, I think you'll see the algorithms become more efficient. I think the threshold in terms of qubits will come down over time. But what that path looks like in time, I don't think anybody really knows. It's just we've got to get the tools out there and make it available for people to use, and then create a pathway to learn from them. And I think this is one of the things I really started to stress with our business, and go back to the picks and shovels business. Okay, we could sell some of these enabling components and get paid, and they go on, and we don't know anything. That's not the business. We're not going to learn anything from that. We've got a lot of money invested in these core parts. We want to help people use them. Even if it's a competitor, we can do it in a way where we're learning together, where there's information coming back. What discoveries did you have? What did you do? So that we can take that to improve the hardware, we can improve the algorithms. It becomes a very virtuous environment. At some point, this will become competitive, but I think until we really get to that point, this is creating a virtuous environment where everybody's learning off of each other. And it'll probably be that way for the next couple of years. The other thing is we talked about this, is really maintaining the relationships with academia. And I think that's an important part of this, is a lot of the enabling technology is coming from academia. And again, we're closely affiliated with 2 institutions. Again, we're using the picks and shovels business, as they call it, to expand our relationships with more and more academic research institutions on a global basis.
A little bit on the theme of kind of partnership and what it means to be a good partner, and I think organizations like Quantum, what's happening here at University of Maryland and Quantum Startup Foundry are a big part of this. What can everybody do? I mean, what advice would you give, especially to entrepreneurs that are early in their journey, of how to become a valuable partner and kind of think about more of an ecosystem approach to how they build their company?
It's not a natural thing to do, right? If I'm going to start a business, I have competitors, I want to win, and first of all, I got to kind of have the mindset, particularly if I win, everyone wins, or you win, I win. It's not a I win, you lose scenario. It takes a while for people to understand. In mature industries, okay, that's fine, that makes sense, because the stakes are there. But here, we're trying to grow the industry. And so getting that mindset of effectively contributing as opposed to taking is really the first place to start. What can I contribute to the knowledge pool so that others can benefit, and I feel comfortable and confident enough that I'm going to contribute, that I'm going to get something back? And that's a big bet. You may get nothing back, but you have to go in the mindset that I want to contribute.
Other questions from the group at all?
I'm David Hopper from MITRE. I know ColdQuanta also has some quantum sensing endeavors. How do you see the sort of difference in the industry verticals there between computing and sensing?
Yeah, so this goes back to, so again, really the focus of the business now is on basically the processing platforms. We do have a portfolio of sensors. At a very high level, my view is that market on the compute and processing side is much more near term than sensing. Our strategy with the sensors is really to find the right partners that are ultimately the customers for those sensors, and then jointly develop those markets together. So we're not going to go out and pioneer the sensors for QPS or the quantum RF and all the other portfolio that we have. It's really to find the right industrial partners that are the users and work to collaborate with them to kind of build the use case for those sensors. Now, what's really nice is, again, the core technology that we're funding both on the compute and the sensor side allows us to ride this continuum. And it's not too dissimilar to what you heard from Atom Computing earlier, right? Where we can continue to push down the cost curve while we're pushing up the performance curve in a pretty dramatic fashion. And so there's a certain elegance to the economies of scale. Again, whether we're building a sensor or we're building a computer, the quantum core is exactly the same. It's really a matter of how we're kind of arranging the atoms inside the core, but it's the same lasers, it's the same fundamental technologies to build that environment.
So I have another question. You described, it's interesting like that. You said we're in a race for quantum with kind of geopolitical consequences, right? And we're in DC here. I would be interested to hear your thoughts on like where you think this is going, what the government can particularly do to support the venture, industry in this space. Well, what would you like to avoid seeing?
Well, obviously, regulation is bad. Regulation drawing the wrong line in the wrong place is a challenge. I think there's a lot of people worried about that. Again, it's rare that this is a once in 100, 200 year kind of opportunity where you get something to this scale that obviously is a large economic win. It's a large win relative to solving really hard problems that can improve the human state. And as a result, there's pretty big geopolitical consequences to kind of mastering that. And in any industry, it's to a larger degree about setting standards. So the countries that can go out and get ahead of this ultimately kind of put themselves in an enviable position where they have not only a technological lead, but from a commercial perspective, they effectively going to drive world standards. Again, this goes back to my comment earlier about, we were driving world standards for wireless and telecom until we made some poor decisions, 20 some years ago that we're now paying for. So, look, I think this is an important dialogue. This is something, again, where I think the industry needs to come together and work with the government to really make sure that everyone really understands what the implications are, understands the implications for making poor decisions relative to inhibiting the ability to export this technology on a global basis. If we're locked out of global markets, my view by default, the U.S. won't win because we can't get to scale. Other countries will get to scale, and again, we lose the right to kind of define standards on a global basis and get the economic consequences from that. Yeah, I think someone asked me this question last week at the White House summit, and the short answer to the question ultimately is the government needs to be a customer. And going back to the sensor question earlier, there's been a lot of investment by the government to develop quantum sensor technology, but there's not a lot of purchasing. We need early adopters for the sensors to get them out in the field. It's the same, at least on the computer side, we're getting commercial engagement for use. We're getting people who are willing to be risk takers and spend time and playing on the machines and realizing they're not perfect and there's a long way to go. And that's the commercial engagement. We don't see that on the sensor side. We need the government to engage on the sensor side to do that. And the last piece is I think we need to, I'll make the statement, this is always controversial, but we need a tax environment that effectively gives investors incentive, unfortunately, to take a much longer perspective on the investment horizon for these deep tech technologies. That's tough to say. And so if we really want North American investors or U.S. investors to do that, we have to create an environment that's conducive to them to do that. Because foreign interests they're coming in with a very long perspective that will come in, they'll take a 15 to 20 year view. And again, I go back to my comment earlier on the debacle we have with the telecom industry. That was a 20-year investment horizon. A bunch of tech companies were acquired in 2001, and it's just now really starting to monetize itself.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. Well, for a hair of audience participation here, I'm curious, so for those of you in the room here, raise your hand if you're on either your first venture or you haven't started a venture yet. Just really quickly. Okay, raise your hand if you've 2 or more ventures. Okay, good number. Okay. Awesome. I'm wondering, just Scott, when I look at your career, and again, I want to be you when I grow up in terms of starting and scaling all these deep tech companies. When you look back to the early part of your career, what do you wish you knew? And what advice would you give for some of the folks that raise their hand on the 0 to 1 ventures, like just from a broad standpoint?
Yeah, I think part of it. So one thing I've really learned, and again, it kind of amplified itself in Luminar, was the importance of building the right culture in the business, but also understanding that culture needs to evolve as the business evolves. The culture can be a great cohesive factor. It also can basically be a blocker to growing the business. And as the business grows, and again, this is not unknown, as you get to 50 employees, 100 employees, 200 employees, the business changes very differently. And so you have to really build cultures that can scale across the business. And
What have you seen without anything, revealing anything, even at those increments? What happens at 50? What happens at 100?
well, at 50, I mean, this is the bane of the optics industry. The optics industry has lots and lots of 50-person companies run by brilliant PhDs. And it's an artificial limitation in most instances. The span of control is 49 people. They're very comfortable with that. They have a nice lifestyle. And they turn away a lot of really interesting opportunities because they're uncomfortable giving up control of the business, or they think giving up control of the business. And that's probably the first big impediment. And again, this is, I particularly see this in the photonics industry, which tends to be very, very deep tech. And this has been really, the result of this has been a supply chain challenge for anyone trying to leverage the optics business. So, and again, back in the telecom days, the reason JDS Uniphase was created is because the supply chain was a bunch of small, fragile players, and it had to be consolidated to get the scale so that you could put the quality systems in place. The LiDAR industry is struggling with the same thing. It's built on the back of a bunch of small players. At Luminar, we knew this going into it, and 7 years ago when we started the company, we knew we were buying our supply chain. That was a day one decision. We were buying the supply chain because we couldn't let that get in the way of our scaling. Because we knew what would happen is we would show up and we'd say, look, we need to order 20,000 or 20 million of something, and by all the way, you have to install all this quality infrastructure in your business in order for us to sell the final system. So you may have 10 people building the part, but you may have 20 people checking boxes and papers to make sure it was built the right way. It's just they don't want to do it. And so, and I honestly think the same thing's going to happen here. This is, again, when I started at ColdQuanta, it really did feel like where we were with the LiDAR business 6 years ago, that the supply chain, there needs to be some supply chain consolidation. There needs to be some roll up in the space to get to critical mass.
Yeah, interesting, yeah. I think we have time. If anyone, please just raise your hand if you have questions. Yeah, please, yeah.
Speaking of consolidation, do you think there are too many hardware companies in the quantum computing space, or not enough? I mean, do you expect all these modalities will survive?
So you've got competing modalities, you've got competing companies in the modalities. One thing I would say is this is about machine time. So I think to the extent if you don't have a machine up and running, or you won't want to have shortly, I think it's going to be very difficult to kind of play on that second wave, because I think the winners and losers in the first wave are probably already around, and the question is going to be how that plays out. So I think in that regard, there's probably enough. Typically in any venture cycle, you get to about 50 companies. You don't want to be number one, you don't want to be number 50, right? So you want to be somewhere in between. That's usually somewhere in the middle, or those are the companies that ultimately succeed. If you're 50, you're too late. I don't know whether we don't need 50 quantum hardware companies. I think that's too many because it's too expensive and the talent pool is too small. I think that's the biggest risk here, is that, again, this is built upon an extremely small and fragile talent pool. And I think part of what will have to happen is scaling is going to be driven more by access to bright people, so that the industry can move a little bit quicker than it necessarily is around access to capital.
Nope. Gentleman in the blue mask.
That's me. Phil from Direct Technologies. On the topic of consolidation, I was wondering, what's your take on the independence of software companies and hardware companies right now?
Yeah, so I'm still forming my opinion on this, but I will say, by analogy, the way we built Luminar, and again, I do believe there's so many analogies to the LiDAR space in what we're doing here, it was tightly coupled. We had a very substantial software team. It was interesting for the first 4 years when I was out on roadshow and trying to justify to investors why we had 45 people in the software organization and we're predominantly a hardware company. It was a tough sell. But that was the right decision. We had, again, because they had access to advanced features on the hardware. They were defining a lot of the advanced features on the hardware and highly influencing it. And quite frankly, pushing the hardware team to do things they didn't want to do. There were really critical features that the software team knew if they could unlock, it changed the whole paradigm of how they were doing perception and algorithm development. And so they pushed the hardware team for those feature sets. The hardware team didn't think it was that important. Conversely, what happened is we were really building behind the scenes a very sophisticated product organization on the software side. We didn't really start selling software until, I think, last year. So, 5 years into it, 6 years into it is when we finally unleashed, started building software products for the industry. And it's, best in class because they had more time on the hardware than anybody. But again, if I had to conjure where we are, I think it's something that's going to be intimately coupled. I don't know how these can grow in parallel. Again, if there's an idea that you can build, again, in the LiDAR industry, you can build generic perception software that runs on any sensing system. It doesn't work. It's 96% efficient, right? 96% efficient isn't going to work. It needs to be as many nines as possible, and for that they have to be coupled.
Yeah, great question. I guess I think we're almost out of time, but just to sort of close out, Scott, I'm always interested when I meet a CEO just to hear how he or she sort of spends him or her time. How do you structure your day at work? What do you wish you had more time to do? How do you structure and create balance, in a personal and professional sense? Any general?
Yeah. So part of it is I'm up at 5 in the morning at CrossFit. That's how I start my day, and usually get through emails before I getting to work isn't that hard right now. I walk down the hallway from my bedroom, but getting back to the office, it's really being efficient with time. Balance is difficult. I'm having to rediscover that again, going back into kind of the insane hours and travel of a startup. It was kind of getting used to the life at Luminar where, the schedule was very different. We had a very large organization, a lot of people working for me, so it wasn't nearly as critical I'd be everywhere. And in 3 weeks, I found I'm back to the old game. So I'm trying to find that balance again, much to my wife's chagrin. For me, a lot of it was, I was very involved with my kids' life, particularly we talk their sports activities. So I spent 15 years coaching lacrosse, youth lacrosse, girls lacrosse, and coached 2 college lacrosse players. And I just finished that. So now I'm back to trying to figure out what I do with all that time. So it's probably going to be building a quantum company.
Yeah. So. Well, I think we are officially out of time, but I just want to thank Scott again. Really fantastic career.
Yep.
Good luck with the new company.
Thank you.
And thanks to Julie for having us here.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
All right. Wow, what a first day. If I could develop a word cloud, I just finished an NLP class, so I'm into word clouds. I think some of the words I would come up with, well, of course, quantum and quantum computing and quantum sensing and quantum everything. But there were some other words that really struck me, like collaboration and ecosystem and partnerships, funding, of course, which brings us here, challenges, talent. Those would all be included, I think. But the biggest takeaway for me was the word change and the ability of quantum computing or quantum sensing and quantum everything to change the world. And it's going to be done by the folks in this room and online watching us. It's really a powerful thing.